Hello, and welcome to our final lesson out of our Judges series. This is Lesson 20, which is covering Judges chapter 21. But before we begin this final lesson out of Judges, let me open us with some prayer. Most gracious and loving God, you watch over us in all the things that we do. Guide our spirits, guide our lives to be in a right relationship with you. And through the words that we read today, through studying your scripture, may you fill us with your grace, with your presence, and with the love that you share with us. And may we find that love and share it with others. And through all things, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the scriptures. We thank you for the wisdom that you give us through your word. And in all things, we praise your name and we thank you in all that you do. Amen. As we begin our lesson today, I want to kind of give you a recap of where we are in the story. This whole series that we're looking at now, this final story group, started in chapter 17. And as the story, as a recap of the story, a man from a Levite who was living in the northern tribal territories of Ephraim had a wife. And she was a concubine wife. They had a disagreement. She left, went back to her hometown, which is Bethlehem down in Judea, which is the same original hometown of David and eventually Jesus. So the Levite then, he's waited 4 months, and now he went down to retrieve his concubine. And again, there may have been some question about her fidelity, the possibility that she had an affair or had a relationship with somebody else. The 4-month period would have elapsed, which would have proven that she was not pregnant. And so he goes down and he visits there, and the father-in-law, the father of the bride or of the wife, persuades him to stay. Beyond what he wanted to stay. And he stays a couple of extra days. And when he finally leaves on that last day, it's late in the afternoon. It's really later than it should be for him to be traveling. He gets as far as the town of Gibeah, and things fall apart from there. He's taken into the home of an old man, and the men of the village treat him the same way the people of Sodom treated the two angels. They wanted to drag him out and dominate him, and that... So anyway, as the story progresses there, that doesn't happen. Instead, the concubine is thrown out. They rape her to death, and the next morning he gets up and throws her over the back of his donkey, and he travels on back home. Then he cuts her up into 12 pieces and sends a piece out to each one of the tribal leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. And they respond by all gathering together at Mizpah. And they gather together at Mizpah, and where they determine what they're going to do. And it ends up that all of the tribe of Israel, the entire tribe of Israel, with the exception of 600 men of the tribe of Israel, are wiped out. And so it is a complete genocide, with the exception of those 600 men. And today's story picks that up from there. The 600 men are hiding in a cave, and they have no wives, no brides. There's no one left in the entire Benjamin clan. And the story today brings that whole episode to a close and resolves the problem of the near genocide of the Benjaminite tribe. So, picking up now with verse 1 of chapter 21. Now the Israelites had sworn at Mizpah, "No one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin." And the people came to Bethel and sat there until evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. They said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, why has it come to pass that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel?" On the next day, the people got up early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and sacrifices of well-being. Then the Israelites said, "Which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up in the assembly to the Lord?" For a solemn oath had been taken concerning whoever did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, "That one shall be put to death." But the Israelites had compassion for Benjamin, their kin, and said, "One tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters as wives?" So as the story picks up today, we find out that while they were gathered at Mizpah before the war, before the civil war that took place that wiped out most of Benjamin, the tribes had gathered at Mizpah, and while they were there, they made two oaths, as we have seen here in this passage. The first one was that none of them will give a daughter to the Benjaminites after this is over. No daughter of the rest of the Israelite tribes will go to Benjamin. Well, this produces a problem, since they have wiped out the entire tribe of Benjamin except those 600 that are in the cave. So what are they going to do about wives? And that's the question they're asking themselves now. What are we going to do about this? Well, they've come to Mizpah, they've come to Bethel, which is very near Mizpah, and they have made they've made sacrifices to God, they've prayed to God, they've offered well-being or peace offerings to God. And they want to find a resolution to this problem, because one of the tribes of Israel is lacking. The way it's actually described here, the literal translation of the passage about that is that there is a break in the wall of Israel, meaning that there is a tribe missing. There is a gap in the well-being of all of Israel. Well, they made the second promise they made there was that any tribe or any clan or any family group that did not answer the call to Mizpah to punish the Benjaminites for their actions in Gilead, the response is that any tribe, any clan that failed to respond would be put to death. Well, there was one town that did not. Well, that's not in the story yet, but that's coming up. There is one town that, and so we'll run into that. But so now they're going, what are we going to do? We've sworn this oath that we're not going to give them our daughters, and so what are we going to do? Picking up with verse 8. Then they said, "Is there anyone from the tribe of Israel who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah?" It turned out that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp, to the assembly. For when the roll was called among the people, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 soldiers there and commanded them, "Go, put the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead to the sword, including the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male you shall devote to destruction." And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had never slept with a man, and brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So their response here is, well, first off, is there anyone who did not come to Mizpah because of that oath we made that we'll put any tribe that did not come to death? Is there any that didn't come? And it turns out there is. That when the roll is called and they discover who has arrived and who didn't arrive, that no one from the town of Jabesh Gilead was there. So they send 12,000, so they gather together 12,000 soldiers. That's 1,000 soldiers from each tribe. Will give up on the Benjamin tribe, so somebody gave more. But there are 12,000 troops. And they're commanded to go to Jabesh Gilead and put the whole town to the sword, including every man, woman, child, and anything that lives in that town. They are devoted to destruction. The word there is haram, that a haram has been declared against Jabesh Gilead, and it is for total destruction. So they go there and they do that, and in the process of wiping out the town, they sort out the women, and they discover that there are 400 women there who are virgins who've never slept with a man. And they bring all of those to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Now Shiloh is, again, in the northern end of Ephraim, and it is territory that really has not been conquered by the Israelite people. Shiloh is still in the hands of the Canaanites. But interestingly enough, that's where the tent of meeting is. That's where the tabernacle is. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is. That's where Eli and his two sons set up their base of operations for maintaining the relationship with God, because that's where the tent of meeting is. That's where the tabernacle, that's the tent of meeting. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is. That's where all of the holy relics are in Shiloh. And so they bring all the women to Shiloh. Let's see what they do. Verse 13. Then the whole congregation sent word to the Benjaminites who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead. But they did not suffice for them. So they send word to the Benjaminites that we want peace, and so peace is attained. The Benjaminites returned, and the women from Shiloh are given, or the women that had been brought to Shiloh are given to those Benjaminites. So they have skirted their own vow to God by finding a tribe that did not come. The people of Jabesh Gilead did not arrive there, so they couldn't make that vow. And so none of the people, although they're all put to death, none of those people had that vow on their lips. And so all of the daughters there, the virgin daughters, could be given away. But what we find is there are only 400 of those virgin daughters, and they need 600 because there are 600 men left of the Benjaminite tribe. So there aren't enough women. So picking up now with verse 15. The people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since there are no women left in Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be heirs for the survivors of Benjamin, in order that a tribe may not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give any of our daughters to them as wives, for the Israelites had sworn, 'Cursed be anyone who gives a wife to Benjamin.'" So they said, "Look, the yearly festival of the Lord is taking place at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebonah." And they instructed the Benjaminites, saying, "Go and lie in wait in the vineyards and watch. When the young women of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyard, and each of you carry off a wife for himself, for the young women of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. Then if their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we shall say to them, 'Be generous, and allow us to have them, because we did not capture in battle a wife for each man, but neither did you incur guilt by giving your daughters to them.' The Benjaminites did so. They took wives for each of them from the dancers whom they abducted. Then they went and returned to their territory and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. So the Israelites departed from there at that time by tribe and families, and they went out from there to their own territories." Well, the other 11 tribes of Israel are are feeling like, well, we really messed up. They have compassion for Benjamin because there's now again a break in the wall. There's a breach in the tribe. There's a break in the wall of Israel. So they come up with another idea. What are we going to do? Those 200 that are left, since there are no women left. What are we going to do? We don't want Benjamin blotted out. We don't want them wiped out. We don't want them to disappear forever. We want them to be able to reconstitute themselves, to rebuild themselves. And yet we can't give them any of our daughters as wives because of the promise we made. So what are we going to do? I have an idea. We have an annual festival at Shiloh that celebrates the grape harvest. And we throw a great big festival, and again, the word festival also means drinking party. We're going to throw a big festival, which we do annually in Shiloh. And while we're having this great big party, if the Benjaminites come out of the vineyards and grab all the wives that they can, if they grab 200 of these young maidens who are dancing, because this is part of the annual festival that they do. This is also part of where they find wives for their sons and daughters, or find husbands and wives for their sons and daughters. And so this is a very appropriate place for this to happen. And so while the young women are dancing, the Benjaminites, they sneak out of they come running out of the vineyards, and each one of them grabs a young woman and carries them off. I know in our modern sensibilities this is a very strange and maybe even a horrible story. But this is how they found a way of getting around the promises that they made to God. And that they didn't give them anything. The Benjaminites took them without the parents' even permission. And they're even allowing themselves an out here, so that when the fathers of these young brides come and complain to the tribal leaders about all of this, they'll say, but look, there's no guilt for any of us, and Benjamin is reconstructed. And so let's not worry about it. So everybody then, after the festival is over and the Benjaminites carry off their new wives, and they go back and they rebuild all the towns of Benjamin that have been destroyed by this civil war. The rest of the tribes go on back to their homes, back to their own territories, back to their own families. And our final verse. In those days there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. This, of course, takes us back to chapter 17, verse 6, where this all begins. This same phrase. And then we see it two other times where they leave out the there was no king in Israel, but all the people did what was right in their own eyes. Which leads us then into the future. My next series of classes is going to be, or lessons here will be on the book of Ruth. There are 4 chapters, so there'll be 4 lessons in Ruth, and then we'll move on to 1 Samuel. Which brings me to back to our story today. There's a couple of little items in this that connect us to the 1 Samuel stories of Saul and David. Now, I've pointed those out as we've moved through this story a couple of times, but there are some really striking ones here in this last chapter. The town of Gilead, the town of Gibeah, where the horrible incident happened. That is the hometown of Saul. Saul is born and lives in Gibeah. But what we recognize from the story is that we need to understand that Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin. A couple of generations, at least a generation, maybe 2 generations after this story takes place, Saul is born in the town of Gibeah, where he is raised. That's that town where all the evil began. And then we have Jabesh Gilead. Jabesh Gilead is destroyed here in this, but Jabesh Gilead is reconstituted, is rebuilt. And Interestingly, Jabesh Gilead is in the southern end of the very southern end of the western of East Manasseh. It is in the very southern end of East Manasseh, and so it's not even in Benjaminite territory, but it's really close to Benjaminite territory. And what appears to have happened is that the people from Jabesh Gilead, the 400 young virgins who came from there and intermingled with or was married off to the Benjaminites, those people, some of those Benjaminites, along with their new brides, moved back to Jabesh Gilead and rebuilt that town. Later, Jabesh Gilead again plays a major role in the life of Saul. The very first conflict that Saul has with the Amalekites, or with another people, and this happens to be the Amalekites, is over Jabesh Gilead. That's his first conflict. And he has to retake Jabesh Gilead. As he does that, the people of Jabesh Gilead honor him and love him more than everybody. And again, he is defending maybe even some of his own people, because he's a Benjaminite and Jabesh Gilead has been re-inhabited by Benjaminites. So these are relatives of his. Later, much later in Saul's life, at the end of his life, when he dies, again he is beheaded, and the men of Jabesh Gilead, they sneak to the town where Saul's body is, and they steal his body back and they bury it with honors. And so the people of Jabesh Gilead play a major role in the future of Saul, and they also play a major role in the development of Saul's life. It's also people he's related to. This final verse here points to the future. It points to the idea, and it also turns this whole story back to the beginning again, because all of this takes place in the same place that the very first story, back in chapter 2 of Judges, takes place. And so it all has come full circle, and the final refrain here tells us that because there is no king, there is no stability in the land, and everybody does what they think is right. Well, that ends our lesson for today. That ends our Judges series. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that parts of it were pretty challenging and maybe even pretty boring. For those of you who stuck through it and managed to get to the end of it, I praise you for that. I look forward to the story of Ruth, which is next, because of the beauty of that story. It is a love story. And so I hope you will join me for that next week as we begin the study of Ruth. God bless and keep you. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And all God's people said, Amen.
God is speaking, God is speaking. Do you hear? Do you hear? Trust and you will hear him. Trust and you will hear him. Do you hear? Do you hear? Trust and you will hear him. Trust and you will hear him. God is love. God is joys. Speaking in his wisdom, speaking in his mercy, using needs, using joys, speaking in his wisdom, speaking in his mercy, speaking. Do you hear? Hear his heart. Trust and you will hear him. If you want to hear him, do you hear? Hear his heart. Trust and you will hear him. If you want to hear him, God is love, always love.